I was reading a piece today where the author was saying that the idea of merit was invented sometime in the early centuries of Buddhism as a way of getting people to donate to monasteries. And that now that we live in a world where people no longer believe in karma, no longer believe in rebirth, nobody's going to believe in merit, so we have to find new ways of financing Buddhist institutions. It's the sort of reasoning that people who like to privatize things engage in. Merit is actually an integral part of the teaching. It's not something that's tacked on. Think of the Buddha's question that he says lies at the beginning of wisdom or discernment. What is skillful, what is unskillful, what is blameworthy, what is blameless? What when I do it will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? What when I do it will lead to my long-term harm and suffering? And the answer to what is skillful, what is blameless, what when I do it will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness? The first level of answer is the three types of meritorious action: generosity, virtue, and the development of goodwill. As the Buddha said, the term act of merit is another word for happiness. It's a type of happiness that's blameless, doesn't harm anybody at all. And when the Buddha taught giving, he didn't teach that it had to be only to monks and nuns. As the Buddha said one time, even if you just throw out the little bit of food and left to the bottom of your cup or the bottom of your bowl as a gift to whatever animals might want to eat it, there's merit there. Not in the sense of brownie points, but in the sense of happiness. You've got something to share. When he was asked where a gift should be given, he says, where you feel inspired. In other words, he's encouraging the goodness of the heart, looking for happiness in ways that are not only harmless, but also beneficial to others. When you can find happiness in doing those things, you've learned some important lessons. There are gradations of happiness. Then you have some freedom of choice. You got some food, you can choose either to eat it yourself or to give it to others. And you think of the happiness that comes from one or the other. And he says, the wise person will always share. He said, even if it's your last meal. You should be happy to share. That develops a good attitude inside. That in the way we look for happiness, we're not just grubbing for happiness. We're thinking about the consequences of our actions. We're looking for the long term. All of which are aspects not only of goodness, but also of wisdom. After all, as human beings, we have only so many resources, so much time, so much energy. And that's a sign of the wise person who realizes that by giving, you gain more than you give. The same principle of the precepts. There are things that you might want to do or say, but you realize if you do them or say them, it's going to be harmful to others. So you hold yourself back. You have principles. There may be ways in which, say, you might benefit from lying. But you realize that you don't want whatever reward would come from a lie. You'd rather have the sense of inner principle, self-esteem that comes, knowing that there are certain things you will not stoop to do. And then the development of limitless goodwill, a totally harmless way of finding happiness. But if you can look at all the people for whom you might have ill will, and you can talk yourself into realizing that you don't gain from that, the world wouldn't gain anything from seeing these people suffer. You're happy to let the issue go. That creates a spaciousness in the mind. It's a good theme to be thinking about. It feels good. And it inspires you to do good actions. And they reinforce the basic wisdom in that original question, what when I do it will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness. The wisdom lies in realizing that your happiness is going to depend on your actions. There is such a thing as long-term, and long-term is better than short-term. And that you have the choice as to what kind of happiness you're going to find, or going to look for. But what the activities of merit teach you are that the more goodness you build into your intention, the longer term the happiness will be. In fact, it's tempting to replace the word merit with the word goodness. Merit always sounds like brownie points. But you say there are 3 types of goodness. You accumulate goodness. And then you think about living in a post-goodness world. It would be a horrible place to be. And as you pursue this type of goodness, it prepares you for the deeper levels of wisdom. Because that question, what when I do it will lead to my long-term welfare and happiness, sets up some standards. If you want to lay claim to something as your happiness, 1, it has to be happiness, and 2, it has to be long-term. So as you're trying to get the mind into concentration, and other thoughts come in, you can ask yourself, which is going to lead to longer-term happiness? Those distracting thoughts, or the state of concentration that I could develop if I really stuck with the breath? This is one of the reasons why the Buddha recommends you develop that perception of inconstancy. Anything that's going to be less than a reliable happiness, it's good to see it as inconstant, so you can be tempted to, not so much tempted, but you can see the reasons for wanting to let it go. You begin to realize if it's inconstant, it's not really happiness, it's not really pleasure. So why lay claim to it? Why lay claim to it as what I want to do so I can have it as my happiness? So you've got the foundation for the 3 perceptions right there in that question. If something is inconstant, stressful, it's not worth holding on to as you or yours. And it's not worth pursuing. That's something that is often forgotten when we think about the 3 perceptions. Is the extent to which the self is not only the experiencer of these things, but it's also the agent that invests time and energy into trying to pursue them. That's why it's a value judgment. Is it worth the effort to go after that kind of happiness, that kind of pleasure that is unreliable? So the practice of merit relates directly to the deeper levels of insight. Notice I said the practice of merit, not just the idea, but actually doing it. You get a good sense for what the Buddha is teaching you. And you've learned about yourself as an agent, trying to find happiness. And you think about the implications. Its impact on yourself, its impact on other people. And you develop that ability to judge what's worth doing and what's not worth doing. All of which will hold you in good stead as you go into the deeper levels of insight. So it's not the case that merit is an extraneous teaching, something that got tacked on, something that can be detached and replaced with something else. It's your basic hands-on experience. In developing the qualities that are going to be needed in order to develop concentration, discernment, that are really reliable. As the Buddha once said, if you're stingy, there's no way you're going to gain the noble attainments. No way you're even going to get jhana. And if you're not virtuous, your concentration is not going to be reliable. Because the practice of merit reminds you that it's not just a matter of technique. I mean, there is technique that has to be followed in working with the breath, both for the sake of concentration and for insight. But there's a goodness of heart that's also involved. And it's that goodness of heart that keeps you going at times when the technique doesn't seem to be working. Or you're getting discouraged. You realize that at the very least you're developing good qualities inside. And you can reflect on the good things you've done by being generous and by being virtuous, and that gives you energy, gives you confidence. So we don't live in a post-merit world. We don't live in a post-goodness world. We live in the world we create with our actions. All the more reason to focus on augmenting our practice, or basing our practice on the practice of merit. And seeing it as a necessary part of the training of the mind.